say should be very much questioned. But just like any law enforcement official, they have to follow the leads, and they have done their due diligence, and it's turning out to not be true. That's why Hillary Clinton did not use it. That's why the Republican candidate who initially funded this dossier did not use it, and eventually sold it to Hillary Clinton. But, you know, it was never used.
Yeah, so you're saying there's a bit of Oppo research that the people who paid for it didn't even bother using, but has somehow justified an 18-month investigation into the sitting president. If we flip this around, if, say, the GOP had found some French spy instead of an MI6 guy, to come up with a salacious dossier saying the Democrat candidate is up to all kinds of kinky shenanigans in Eastern Europe. Would you be happy to have the FBI investigate obvious nonsense for 18 months?
No, I would not. But it does, like I said, it's just their due diligence of investigating, leaving no stone unturned. But I want to remind you that what led to this was the firing of Director Comey very unceremoniously. No. And all of there were multiple instances of the Russian government trying to hack into voting systems in several states. So there were lots of things that triggered this. It was not just this dossier, as Donald Trump himself tried to allude to this morning.
Well, wait a minute. This Russia investigation has actually been going on for longer. It predates the election. So, in other words, why would the Russians be trying to hack into a voting machine in Iowa in June of 2016?
Mark, because they have an agenda to fulfill, and disrupting our way of democracy suits their agenda. They are our adversary. Make no mistake about it. I myself am a veteran Army Ranger. I know that Russia is our adversary. They are not looking out for our best interest. Yeah, but we have a situation here where the only thing that concrete that anyone's been able to find is that Putin paid for 100 grand's worth of Facebook ads. I never knew, speaking as someone who's not even eligible to run, I didn't know you could steal an election for 100,000 in Facebook ads when your candidate, Mrs. Clinton, spent $2/3 billion. You spend $2/3 billion, but a guy comes along and buys 100 grand of Facebook ads, and boom, snaffles the election away. Is that the theory? No, like I said, I think the real problem here is when we found evidence that they tried to actually affect the voting machines in those states. That is a serious problem, and I'm glad that the FBI is looking into it. We should all do that. We should all want the FBI to make sure that our way of democracy is protected and defended. Well, they have an oath to defend and protect our Constitution against enemies, foreign and domestic. We have to make sure that Donald Trump is not an enemy of the state by colluding with Russia.
Well, taking your line that Russia is a geopolitical strategic enemy of the United States, they managed to get this election-stealing racket, whatever it is, hacking into voting machines in New Hampshire or Florida or wherever, up and running. We've been investigating this now for 18 months. Why can't the FBI wrap up an investigation into an election campaign in less than the 2-year period between elections?
Mark, we are not privy to that information, just like we were not privy to all of the information into Bill Clinton and Watergate, which ended up birthing the Monica Lewinsky scandal. We don't have all of that information, so it's impossible and preposterous for us right now to speculate on why it is taking this long. They are doing their jobs. They are public servants doing their jobs, and they're under attack on the daily by Donald Trump, who I think is doing a psyop campaign because he knows that there's more information coming, and he wants to plant a seed of doubt in the public. To me, that is reprehensible.
Well, Robin, thanks for framing it as a psyops campaign. If you're actually targeted by the FBI, I'm not sure you need psyops to want to protest against that. Tom Fitton is the president of Judicial Watch, and Tom, Robin was rather coy about that. But basically, this totally worthless dossier has had an incredible life. It's like a zombie. You cannot drive a stake through this piece of garbage thing that a foreign spy cooked up for the Democrats. It's running around like a mechanical hare all across town. Has it got any probative value, as the lawyers like to say?
Well, according to your news organization's reporting on the testimony of Andrew McCabe, the number 2 at the FBI, they couldn't confirm anything, or he refused to confirm anything beyond the fact that Carter Page, a campaign advisor to the Trump campaign, may have traveled to Russia.
Right.
Other than that, there's nothing they've been able to confirm. But what we have been able to confirm is that the authors of the Trump dossier were Clinton campaign vendors. And they were working with the Obama Justice Department and the Obama FBI. And the FBI of the Obama administration was, the leadership there was vehemently anti-Trump, it's now evident. And they laundered this campaign document into the Justice Department and FBI, and it may have been used to spy on the Trump campaign. And it still may be being used by Robert Mueller. Right. So, you know, to the degree the dossier is still being used by Mueller, it's a real ethical concern because of where it came from.
No, I agree with you on that, Tom. I mean, in a sense, it's a bit like what in Hollywood Alfred Hitchcock used to call the MacGuffin. It's like used as the pretext to set the game afoot. In other words, it had no value as Oppo research to Hillary Clinton, but it had value to the government, the outgoing government, in getting them into a position where they could surveil their political opponents. That's the conspiracy theory.
And it gets even worse for Mrs. Clinton, because what happened is that Mrs. Clinton used her law firm, her campaign's law firm, as a cutout to spend money on this Fusion GPS dossier effort, who went to Russia, supposedly, to talk to intelligence people and intelligence sources in Russia. So you had the Clinton campaign spending money to send people to Russia to find dirt on Donald Trump, and Donald Trump's the one under investigation on collusion. And to me, this is a political investigation. It was designed by never-Trumpers, anti-Trumpers, right, whatever you want to call it. James Comey obviously did not like President Trump, and he leaked information in order to get this appointment of Robert Mueller. And it's just gone downhill from there. And now we found out the top FBI agent under Mueller, in terms of counterintelligence, was a never-Trumper. The number 2, Andrew Weissman, the number 2 prosecutor on his team, attended Hillary Clinton's election night party, and was sending friendly emails to Sally Yates as she thwarted the rule of law at the Justice Department. That's actually the Obama holdover.
That's actually incredible, Tom. Thank you for that. It is the revenge of Jim Comey, and a former FBI official says the fired director's behavior has effectively sabotaged the credibility of the Mueller investigation. That FBI official joins us next on Tucker Carlson Tonight. Special counsel Robert Mueller has dominated dozens of news cycles with his investigation into alleged Russian meddling in U.S. politics. But that's not the only DOJ investigation going on. Inspector General Michael Horowitz has spent a year investigating how Jim Comey and the FBI handled their investigation into Hillary Clinton's email server. Horowitz is the one who found Peter Strzok's text messages to his paramour bashing Donald Trump. Chris Swecker is a former assistant director at the FBI. He says Jim Comey's conduct last year has become a trap for Mueller's own investigation. Chris, I guess to use the president's words, whether or not the FBI is tainted, Mueller's investigation has been tainted by the revelations about these never-Trumpers in the previous investigation.
Well, Director Mueller is living with some of the things, some of the decisions and bad judgment of former Director Comey, who was in the position for 4 years before Director Mueller was appointed special counsel. And what's happened with Agent Strzok and his paramour is not helpful to the investigation, wherever his investigation is going. with 38 years of experience in this business around criminal investigations, I can tell you a good defense attorney can make something out of this alleged bias.
Yeah, yeah, that's critical if any of this stuff ever winds up before a jury. You lay the blame on Comey. His behavior since being removed from the Bureau, and indeed during the last couple of years before that, seems like a man temperamentally unsuited for the job he held. Is that a fair estimation?
Well, frankly, I was surprised at his judgment and his behavior. He had a good reputation. I think the agents liked him. He's very personable, and I dealt with him in my capacity as head of the FBI's criminal division. But the judgment that he displayed and the rules that he broke when he made a prosecutive decision as the FBI director and then announced it in great detail to the American public, instead of handing that investigation off to Loretta Lynch, who, if he thought was conflicted, could have recused herself and passed it down one notch, was just monumental bad judgment. I think a series of cascading events have that is what has drawn the FBI into politics.
Let me ask you about that, because if a crime winds up in the county courthouse, a policeman investigates it and the county attorney decides whether to prosecute it. In this case, the policeman and the county attorney were the same person, Jim Comey. Is that unusual in the Bureau's history?
Very unusual. If you look at the Justice Department procedures and the FBI's procedures and the Code of Federal Regulations, there is a separation between investigations and prosecution. The FBI will predicate an investigation with facts. They'll open it up, they'll conduct the investigation, they'll consult with the U.S. Attorney, but the final prosecutive decisions are always made by either the U.S. Attorney or someone within the main Justice Department. That's just the way it works.
Let me ask you this, because as I understand it, there's about 35,000 employees of the FBI, yet the same handful of people investigating one presidential candidate, Hillary Clinton, then seemed to transfer seamlessly to investigate the other presidential candidate, Donald Trump. Do you think that's best practice, as it were?
No, I don't. Obviously, former Director Comey thought that was his A-team, so he had them transition very quickly to the Russian investigation after what I thought was a very half-hearted non-investigation of Hillary Clinton's emails. So that investigation runs out supposedly, and then it seems like a good percentage of that team was assigned to the Russian investigation with all the baggage they brought with them.
Yeah, you'd almost think it was like one reputation investigation. Get Hillary off the hook, and if that doesn't work, get Trump onto it. Chris, thanks very much. Interesting to hear from a former number 3 G-man during these recent years. The United Nations got a fat lump of coal in its Christmas stocking this year, courtesy of the Trump administration. UN Ambassador Nikki Haley has announced a $285 million cut to the UN's budget for 2018. The US pays 22% of the UN's overall operating costs. Dr. Alan Mendoza is Executive Director of the Henry Jackson Society, a British think tank. Dr. Mendoza, how are these supposed cuts to America's UN largesse playing in London and elsewhere in Europe?
Well, not well. I think they've played about as well as the American decision to recognize Jerusalem as Israel's capital. This is not the most popular policy in Europe, but I've got to be honest, I think the Americans have done the right thing here. You're looking after your own financial responsibilities, and you're making it clear that it won't be business as usual at the UN, and things have to change.
Well, to go back to that Jerusalem vote that you just mentioned, isn't that actually part of the problem with the UN, that it's a very lavish body for striking attitudes? And that doesn't matter whether it's the Organization for Islamic Cooperation or the European Union. They all swan into the General Assembly and strike an attitude on Israel and then stick US taxpayers with the tab for it. I mean, is there any purpose to a body such as that?
Well, I think the General Assembly is just a waste of space. I mean, if you look at what you see there, you see democracies completely outnumbered by non-democracies, which wasn't, I think, the goal of the UN when it was set up. And as you say, you have every hobby horse being flogged, and the results are that frequently the democracies don't get their way in terms of what you might think would be sensible international policy, and you get crazy things passed through. Now, of course, it has no sort of standing value. But then you've got a question, as you suggest, what's the point of an organisation, or at least a body, that has no ability to influence things and which gets hijacked in this way?
Meanwhile, back in the real world, the Islamic State has lost 98% of its territory. And yet that's barely made the papers because nobody wants to give Donald Trump the credit for it.
Well, I think this is the big story of 2017. It's been the defeat of the so-called everlasting caliphate. And indeed, Donald Trump and, of course, the American military must take a lot of responsibility and praise for this. But you're right, it doesn't come across in terms of public understanding, or certainly political elite understanding. But I think we will feel the impact of this going forwards in reduced terrorist attacks, of course, a reduced threat going forwards from radical Islam and other such matters. So, yes, I think the world does owe a great debt to Donald Trump, and indeed to all those who have prosecuted this war to its ultimate end point.
What's your solution to the UN? Because it's basically the World War II victory parade. It's America, Britain, France, Russia, plus China. And if you want to reform anything, various of those parties object. Is it just something that should be left to die, every 200 million by 200 million cut, or can it be reformed?
Well, I think you've hit upon something there, which is that the way to reform it is not to try and get consensus, because it's impossible. Which power, say, of those five alone will give up their veto power and look at that? Which group will want to sort of, succumb to less influence? It can't work that way. But I think the way's been shown, in a sense, by this budget cut. You've got the ability now to reform the step and say, we don't think this works. We're not funding it anymore. And if you don't fund it, then it won't go forwards in that way anymore. So the power is there. Do we have the confidence to use it?
That's always the question. They like their money. Dr. Mendoza, those UN diplomats. California Governor Jerry Brown has good news for the immigrants of his state. You can commit a felony, and he'll still try to keep you from being deported. We'll debate that story next on Tucker Carlson Tonight. Governor Jerry Brown has a message for his constituents. Non-citizens don't just have rights here in the US, they may have more rights than you do. Just before Christmas, Brown pardoned 2 immigrants scheduled to be deported for committing felonies here in the US. One of the 2 men was a gang member convicted of an illegal weapons charge. Brown's hope is that the pardons will allow both immigrants to stay in America. Evidently, he believes they will greatly strengthen America. Jose Magana is an attorney and immigration advocate. He joins us. Jose, this is a strategy by guys like you to use gubernatorial pardons to do an end run around the deportation process, correct?
Well, Mark, I think there's a little bit of confusion. We may be looking at 2 different versions of the Constitution, because mine actually has the 10th Amendment in it. And under the 10th Amendment, governors are expected to regulate their state's criminal justice system, including pardons. These individuals went through an incredibly rigorous and stringent process to be eligible for these pardons, including 10 years of being crime-free, obtaining a certificate of rehabilitation, and paying their debt to society.
Well, wait a minute before we get to that, because in 20 years, from 1991, Arnold Schwarzenegger, Gray Davis, and Pete Wilson pardoned a grand total between them of 15 criminals, 15 pardons. That's 3/4 of a pardon per year. In 6 years, Governor Brown has done, I think it's up around 1,500 pardons. So clearly, the nature of a presidential pardon and the 10th Amendment and the power of the pardon is changing. And to go back to my question, that's because you guys have figured that the immigration lobby, the illegal immigration lobby, has figured this is a great way to do an end run around the national government's power to deport.
It's a great way to help individuals who have been here for 30, 40, 50 years, who emigrated to the United States legally, as both of these individuals did, who have deep legal connections in U.S. citizen families, to essentially present their case in front of an immigration judge. These pardons don't guarantee their ability to stay in the country. Now, Mark, you were Canadian, you had a green card. If this had happened to you, I would be fighting for your opportunity to fight and show that you're a contributing member to this country, which you are. You're doing the jobs that Americans don't want to do, like hosting the show.
Hosting for Tucker, yeah. I'll take you up on that, because some twit at the border tried to deport my little daughter. There was no there's no kind of sentimentality about legal immigration in certain respects. But you know as well as I do that when a citizen commits a crime, you're stuck with the citizen. When a non-citizen commits a crime, he is at risk of deportation. So why is the immigration lobby so eager not even to deport criminals? If you want to change people's